By the morning after the night march around the southern flank, Rommel's offensive had become something more disturbing than an attack against the Gazala line. Axis armored columns were now moving behind parts of the British defensive system, and the battle was no longer oriented in the comfortable direction the defenders had expected. The British boxes still existed, the minefields still marked dangerous ground, and the Eighth Army still had powerful armored formations available. Yet the psychological shape of the battlefield had changed. Rommel was behind the line, and that meant commanders, tank crews, gunners, drivers, and headquarters staffs had to ask a frightening question. Where exactly was the front now?
If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore.
The desert made that question difficult to answer. In a more enclosed battlefield, roads, villages, woods, rivers, and ridges help soldiers understand where they are and where the enemy is likely to appear. In the western desert, dust and distance could erase those certainties. Columns moved across open ground, sometimes visible only as dark smears or rising clouds on the horizon. Reports traveled unevenly, and a unit might be told that enemy armor was in one place, only to discover that it had already moved somewhere else. At Gazala, Rommel's southern sweep turned geography into confusion. The enemy was not merely attacking, he was appearing in places where the British system had not expected him to be.
For British headquarters, the problem was not simply that Rommel had moved behind the line. The problem was understanding what that movement meant before it was too late. Was the southern thrust the main attack, or a dangerous raid? Was Rommel overextended and vulnerable, or had he already unhinged the defense? Should British armor concentrate against him immediately, or protect the boxes, headquarters, and supply routes? These questions had to be answered with partial information. In fast armored warfare, a decision delayed can be fatal, but a decision made too early on the wrong picture can be just as damaging. Rommel's mobile force was not a single solid block. It included German panzer formations, Italian armor, reconnaissance elements, anti-tank units, artillery, engineers, command vehicles, and supply columns trying to keep up with the fighting troops. That mixture mattered because movement behind the line created opportunity and danger at the same time. Tanks could strike, but anti-tank guns had to be brought forward to hold ground and defeat counterattacks. Engineers had to deal with mines and routes. Fuel and ammunition had to arrive before bold maneuver became empty posture. Rommel had placed himself in a threatening position, but his force now needed organization and support to survive there. The British armored formations that moved to meet him were not helpless. They had grants, cruisers, artillery support, and experienced crews who understood that the Axis thrust had exposed itself by swinging so far around the flank. At moments, the British had real chances to strike Rommel while his columns were stretched, disordered, or short of secure supply. But chance is not the same as decision. To destroy a mobile enemy behind the line, the British had to find him, fix him, concentrate against him, and keep pressure on him before he could settle into a defensive arrangement. Those tasks were hard enough in clear conditions. In dust, confusion, and uncertain command relationships, they became harder still. The resulting fighting often felt less like a clean set-piece battle and more like a series of collisions. Units ran into one another across the open desert, sometimes without a full understanding of who was nearby or how large the enemy force actually was. A British tank formation might engage Axis armor, only to meet anti-tank guns positioned to punish a direct advance. Axis units might push forward, then suddenly find British armor or artillery threatening their flank. The sense of a stable line disappeared. In its place came a battlefield of sudden contact, shifting reports, and brief windows of opportunity that opened and closed before higher command could always react. Rommel's strength in this environment was his ability to exploit uncertainty. He understood that if he could keep the British guessing, he could make them spend strength in the wrong places or commit armor in separate pieces. His forward command style gave him a feel for immediate opportunities, and his troops were experienced in using tanks and anti-tank guns together. German formations could maneuver aggressively, then use well-sighted guns to break British counterattacks. Italian units, too, remained part of the pressure, even when some were checked or delayed. The Axis method was not just speed for its own sake. It was speed followed by a defensive sting that made pursuit dangerous. Yet, this was not a one-sided story of Axis mastery. Rommel's position behind the line was also precarious. His supply routes were uncertain, the minefields remained a barrier between his force and easy resupply from the west, and Bur Hakeim continued to threaten the southern end of his movement. A commander behind the enemy line can look terrifying from the defender's point of view, but he can also become trapped if the defender reacts well. Rommel had created a crisis, but he had also carried his army into a place where fuel, ammunition, and routes through the minefields became matters of immediate survival. The same maneuver that dislocated the British also exposed the Axis. For the men inside the British boxes, Rommel's appearance behind the line must have changed the emotional pressure of the battle. A box was designed to fight all around, but knowing that enemy armor had passed behind or around the defensive system was still unsettling. It raised questions about supply, relief, communications, and whether the wider battle was being won or lost. A position could remain strong tactically while becoming operationally isolated. That was one of the central dangers of Gazala. Local firmness did not automatically create campaign control. A garrison could hold its perimeter while the mobile battle beyond it moved in a direction that made the position less useful. The British command system struggled to turn Rommel's danger into Rommel's destruction. There were reports that suggested the Axis force was overextended. There were moments when British commanders believed he might be trapped against the minefields and vulnerable to a coordinated blow. But coordination was exactly the problem. Armored brigades, infantry boxes, artillery, and headquarters did not always act with the unity required to crush a mobile enemy quickly. Attacks could go in separately, arrive late, or encounter prepared Axis anti-tank defenses. Rommel's force might be in trouble, but it was still dangerous, and attacking a dangerous enemy in fragments gave him the chance to survive. This was the battle of orientation in its purest form. Orientation does not only mean knowing north, south, east, and west. It means understanding the enemy's intention, your own position, the location of friendly forces, the condition of your supplies, and the meaning of the last report you received. At Gazala, orientation was constantly under attack. Dust clouds became guesses. Radio messages became arguments. A headquarters map could show positions that had already changed. Tank crews might know what was happening in front of their guns, but not what was happening 5 miles away, where the larger battle was being decided. The experience also revealed a broader lesson about armored warfare. Tanks create movement, but movement creates information problems. The faster a battle develops, the more difficult it becomes for commanders to understand it. Radios help, but they do not eliminate confusion. Reconnaissance helps, but it can be blocked, delayed, or misread. A commander who moves faster than the enemy's ability to interpret events gains a powerful advantage, even before he wins a decisive tactical fight. Rommel's presence behind the Gazala line mattered because it forced the British to solve too many problems at once: defend the boxes, protect Tobruk, counterattack the Axis armor, secure supply routes, and understand a battlefield that refused to stay still. Rommel Behind the Line was therefore both a triumph of initiative and the beginning of a dangerous gamble. He had disrupted the Gazala defense and made the Eighth Army react to his movement, but he had not yet won the campaign. His columns needed fuel, his routes needed opening, and his exposed position had to be turned into something more stable before British pressure could crush it. The next phase of the battle would revolve around that paradox. The attacker seemed to be trapped, yet somehow still held the initiative. Gazala had entered its strangest stage, where a force behind the line could look doomed and dominant at the same time, and where the meaning of victory depended on who could impose order on the desert first.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.